At my parents' anniversary party, I was seated in the garage. Dad said, "It's just for extended family." I looked around. Everyone else had a seat, even the cousin who stole from them. So I picked up my gift, turned around, and said, "Extend this." The string quartet was playing Vivaldi when my father put his hand on my back and pushed me toward the garage. Not hard. He'd never done anything hard in his life. Everything Gerald Foster did was soft and smiling, with just enough deniability to call you crazy for noticing. It was a gentle pressure, fingertips between my shoulder blades, steering me left instead of right, away from the candlelit tables and the rose gold arch and the 200 guests who were already settling into their seats. "The main room's getting tight," he said, smiling over my shoulder at someone more important. "Extended family's just through there. More room. You'll be comfortable." Extended family. I knew every person in that room by name, blood type, and dietary restriction. I had built that room. Every vendor, every flower, every chair. I had chosen it, confirmed it, paid the deposits on it. I had spent 11 late nights and 5 months turning my parents' 35th wedding anniversary into the kind of event that made guests reach for their phones just to capture it. I walked through the breezeway and into the garage. One folding chair, a riding lawnmower, a can of Rust-Oleum spray paint with a red plastic cap, a fluorescent tube light that buzzed like a dying insect. Through the wall, 40 feet of drywall away, I could hear the Vivaldi, the Four Seasons. Spring. I had specifically requested that piece for the cocktail hour. I had typed the words Antonio Vivaldi, op number 1, into an email at 11:47 on a Tuesday night while my husband slept, and I sat at my desk with cold tea and an open vendor portal. I sat down on the folding chair. It scraped concrete beneath me. I looked at the silver-wrapped gift in my lap and I waited, the way you wait when you're certain someone is about to come fix an obvious mistake. 11 minutes. Nobody came. That's when I picked up my phone and found the group chat. Let me tell you who I am, because you need to understand the specific shape of this betrayal to understand why I did what I came back to do. My name is Iris Foster. I'm 34 years old. I'm the oldest of 3 children in a family that runs the way a lot of families run, not on love exactly, but on function, on someone making sure things work. That someone has always been me. I became the family's operational backbone sometime around 2009 when my mother Diane had her first hip surgery and someone had to coordinate the insurance claims, the physical therapy schedule, the prescription pickups, and the rotation of casseroles from church friends. My father Gerald, vice president of something forgettable at a regional bank for 30 years, a man who wore leadership like a hat he'd borrowed and never returned, was not equipped for logistics. He was equipped for golf and opinions and sitting at the head of tables, so I did it. I was 22. I had just graduated with an accounting degree and started a mid-level finance job, and for 3 months I ran my parents' household like a project manager, made a spreadsheet, color-coded, sent weekly updates. They never thanked me, but they never stopped calling either. By the time I was 25, I had quietly, invisibly become the person who held the Foster family together. I managed the calendar. I coordinated medical appointments for Grandma Ruth, my father's mother, a tiny silver-haired woman with macular degeneration and a dry wit I have loved since I was 6 years old. I handled the property taxes on the family cabin in the Catskills. I organized every birthday party, every holiday gathering, every vendor payment that Gerald kept forgetting to chase down. Meanwhile, my brother Brett, 32 and charming as a golden retriever, showed up when things were fun and disappeared when they were hard. My cousin Cody, the son of my father's brother, a man who had been borrowing money from the family since before I was born, had graduated into petty theft about 3 years ago, lifting cash from wallets and, most recently, a pair of pearl and sapphire earrings that had belonged to our great-grandmother and been passed down to Ruth. Ruth knew who took them. The family knew who took them. Cody sat at every family dinner with the earrings' absence unacknowledged. Like a broken window everyone was pretending was just a breeze. And then my parents' 35th anniversary approached, and my mother called me and said, I remember exactly where I was, standing in the pasta aisle at Whole Foods. We were thinking about something small, a dinner maybe. I should have said, that sounds lovely, I'll RSVP. Instead, I said, I'll handle it. 5 months, 11 late nights, 114 emails. I booked the Hartwell Lodge, a restored Victorian estate 40 minutes from my parents' home that I had visited for a wedding 3 years prior and remembered for its original hardwood floors and the way the garden looked at dusk. I negotiated the buyout rate. I arranged the catering through Plum and Larder, a farm-to-table operation I had worked with twice before whose owner, Marco Villanueva, I knew would accommodate my grandmother's dietary needs without being asked twice. I hired the Ashby String Quartet, 4 Juilliard graduates who played private events on weekends. I chose the Vivaldi for cocktail hour because my grandmother had once mentioned in passing 12 years ago that she used to play it on violin as a girl in Rochester. I did not tell anyone I remembered this. I arranged wheelchair transport for Ruth through Medisys Mobility, a licensed medical transport company. Not a taxi, not an Uber. A proper service that knew how to handle her chair and her hearing aids and the precise combination of dignity and care that Ruth required and rarely asked for. I chose the floral arrangements. I chose the chair covers. I researched the difference between Chiavari chairs and ghost chairs and chose Chiavari because they caught the candlelight better. I designed the table layout so that the acoustics from the string quartet would carry evenly across the room. I found a Polaroid photograph from my parents' courthouse wedding in 1989, a cracked, faded image I'd discovered taped inside a kitchen cabinet when I was helping my mother pack for a renovation, and spent 3 weeks working with a photo restoration artist named Daniel Yoon to rebuild it pixel by pixel. I had it printed on archival paper, mounted in a silver frame, and wrapped in linen cord and silver paper that I had sourced from a stationery shop in Brooklyn. Beneath the photograph, in the package, was the paid-in-full full tax certificate for the Catskills cabin, every canceled check, every certified mail receipt, because for 4 years, without being asked, without being reimbursed, without mentioning it once, I had been paying the property taxes on my father's family cabin, $11,400 across 16 quarterly installments, because Gerald had stopped opening the county mail, and I had discovered the delinquency notices in a stack of papers I was helping him sort through in 2020. I paid it. All of it. I sent certified letters. I documented everything. My mother's signature is on 2 of those receipts. The card I wrote said, 35 years of the Foster family. Here's 35 more. The cabin is clear, free, and yours. Love, Iris. That was the gift. That was what was sitting in my lap in the garage, in the fluorescent buzz, while the Vivaldi played through 40 feet of drywall. I found the group chat by accident. There were 2 threads running in the family WhatsApp. The main one, which I administered, and a secondary one I'd been added to for venue logistics 6 weeks earlier. I had stopped checking it once the logistics were finalized. Too busy. What I found, buried under a thread about parking and a debate about the vegetarian entree, was a conversation from 6 days before the party. My mother. Iris can sit in the side area. She won't mind. 15 minutes later, my father put her in the garage. More room for the Hendersons. Brett. 9 minutes after that, she'll understand LOL. That was it. That was the entire conversation. No one replied to pushback. No one said actually Iris built this entire event. No one said Iris arranged the transport for your mother, Gerald. No one typed a single word of dissent. They planned it in a chat I had created and administered. I read it 3 times, sitting in a folding chair next to a lawnmower, holding a gift worth more than everyone's combined awareness of me. Then I stood up. The chair scraped concrete like a period at the end of a sentence. I walked out of the garage, through the breezeway, and into the garden, steady, unhurried. My hands weren't shaking. They were very still, which, in my experience, is the more frightening sign. I walked past the floral arch I had designed, past the bar I had coordinated, past the Ashby String Quartet, who were mid-phrase of the Vivaldi, 4 musicians I had found and booked and briefed on the timeline. I walked past Cody Marsh, sitting in a gold Chiavari chair, a chair I had selected, with a white linen napkin across his lap, laughing at something, leaning back with the easy posture of a man who has never been held accountable for a single thing in his life. The earrings were still gone. He was still here. I walked past him and kept going. My mother caught me at the garden gate. She moved fast for someone who claims her hip hasn't been right since 2019. Iris? Her voice was the specific low hiss of someone trying to contain a situation without drawing attention to it. Wait, don't do this in front of everyone. I stopped, turned. She was wearing the blue dress I had told her she looked beautiful in when she bought it 3 weeks ago. Her hair was done. Her earrings were pearl drops. Not Ruth's, because Ruth's were in a pawn shop, but close enough to make a point without saying it. Iris, softer now, familiar. She reached for my arm. You always understand. You know how to handle things. That's why we count on you. You always understand. Her magic password, the one that had been working on me since I was 9 years old, the one that had gotten me through 17 holiday gatherings and 4 family crises, and 1 very specific hip surgery without a single word of credit. I looked at her face, at the way her eyes were doing the thing they did when they were computing, calculating, deciding which version of me they needed to produce. I held up the silver gift so she could see it clearly. Extend this, I said. Then I turned around and walked to my car. I want to be precise about what the next 4 months looked like, because people assume that what I did at Ruth's birthday dinner was impulsive. It wasn't. The first thing I did, the morning after the party, was call my accountant. Her name is Patricia Osei, CPA, 17 years in practice, whose firm had handled my personal taxes since I left my corporate finance job to help Marcus build his company. I told her what I'd paid on the cabin. I told her I needed a formal accounting. Every check, every payment, every installment turned into a recoverable document. She didn't ask questions. Patricia never asks unnecessary questions. That's why I've worked with her for 9 years. I'll have you a full ledger and statement by end of week, she said. You want it formatted for legal use? Please. The second call was to my estate attorney, Nolan Briggs, JD, whose office I had used when Marcus and I updated our wills after the twins were born. I asked him 2 things: whether my payment of someone else's property taxes created any claim on the property, and whether I was owed restitution. You have a claim, he said carefully. Whether you want to pursue it is a different conversation. But yes, you have a very clean paper trail, and that matters. I told him I didn't want the property. I just wanted a document. A document I can put on a table, I said. He understood. The third call was one I'd been turning over for 2 weeks before I made it. Dr. Layla Marsh, no relation to Cody, is a licensed clinical psychologist with a practice in White Plains, whom I had seen twice years earlier during a stretch of burnout that I'd misread as just being tired. I called her and made an appointment, not because I was in crisis, but because I wanted to be certain about something. I want to know, I told her in our first session back, if what I'm planning is revenge or clarity. She considered this for a moment. Tell me what you're planning, I told her. She was quiet for a long time. What's the difference in your mind? She asked. Revenge, I said, is making them feel bad. Clarity is making them see accurately. And which do you want? I thought about the group chat. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. About Brett's laughing emoji. About my mother's voice at the gate. You always understand. And the way she'd reached for my arm, the way you reach for a tool. I want them to see accurately, I said. Whether that feels bad is up to them. Dr. Marsh nodded slowly. Then you know what you're doing, she said. Ruth's 78th birthday dinner was on a Saturday in October at Callaway's, a family-style restaurant my grandmother had loved for 30 years because, as she put it has real tablecloths and doesn't make you feel like you're eating in an airport. I arrived 7 minutes early with 2 things: a manila folder, thick with documents, and the white plastic plastic folding chair from the Hartwell Lodge garage. I had called the venue the week after the party and asked if it was still there. The manager, a young woman named Soraya who had coordinated my entire event and who I had already written a glowing review for, had said yes, and I'd driven out and bought it for $12 and carried it to my car. I carried it into Callaway's and leaned it against the wall behind my chair. My Aunt Deborah, my father's sister, 62, retired school teacher, the only other person in this family who seemed to have functioning peripheral vision, saw it first. She looked at it, looked at me, pressed her lips together in what might have been, from a different angle, a small smile. My mother saw it second, went the color of uncooked dough. Ruth was at the head of the table, which is where she should always be. She looked at me when I came in, and then she looked at the chair, and I saw her eyes move between the two of them with the sharp, quiet intelligence that macular degeneration had not touched at all. "Iris," she said, and held out her hand. I took it, kissed her cheek, said, "Happy birthday, Grandma," and sat down. They waited until appetizers were cleared. That's when Gerald leaned forward, patriarch voice engaged, the one he used for speeches and for sentences that began with, "I've been thinking," and said, "Iris, we need to talk about the cabin. The property tax assessment is past due. Nobody's been able to access the county tax portal. It's all registered in your name and we can't. I've been paying it," I said. I opened the folder. $11,400, 4 years, 16 quarterly installments. I turned the first page toward the table. "I sent certified letters each year notifying you that I was managing the account. Your wife signed 2 of the return receipts." Silence. "The kind that fills a room up from the floor." I turned to the second page. "This is a complete accounting of every task I've performed for this family since 2009. 41 items. Medical coordination for mom's hip surgery, 2009 and 2014. Calendar management. Ruth's Medisys transport arrangements going on 6 years. Every birthday, every holiday, every vendor contract, every bill you forgot, every insurance claim you didn't know how to file." I let them look at it. 41 items, professionally formatted by my accountant, Patricia Osei, CPA. If you'd like her contact information, I can provide it. Gerald's neck was doing the red thing it did when he was angry and didn't want to show it. "Iris, I'm almost done." I reached into the bag at my feet. "This is the gift I brought to your anniversary party." I set the silver package on the table. I untied the linen cord carefully because I had tied it carefully, and I folded the silver paper back and opened the frame and set it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. The Polaroid. 1989. Courthouse steps. My parents, young and terrified, holding hands like they were the only 2 people in a very large world. Restored pixel by an artist named Daniel Yoon, who had spent 3 weeks reconstructing a cracked, faded photograph into something that looked like a memory you'd want to keep. Beneath it, the paid-in-full tax certificate, the canceled checks, the certified mail receipts with my mother's signature clearly visible on 2 of them, and the card. My mother read it from across the table. I watched her lips move. 35 years of the Foster family. Here's 35 more. The cabin is clear, free, and yours. Love, Iris. No one at the table breathed. "You put me in a garage," I said, "the night I was going to give you this." Gerald's jaw worked. His neck was a deeper red now, the color of something wrong. "You're twisting this. We needed help with the overflow seating. That's where the extra chairs were." "There was 1 chair, Dad." My voice was even. I had practiced being even, not because I was afraid of emotion, but because emotion was not what I needed in that room. 1 folding chair, a lawnmower, a can of spray paint, and you smirked when you walked me in there. I paused. "I saw your face. This is exactly what you've always done." He sat back, spreading his hands, becoming the reasonable one, the patriarch who tried. "You take everything personally. You always have. I've spent 35 years building this family. You didn't build anything." It was very quiet when I said it. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. "I did," I said. "You showed up." The table cracked open. Diane had started crying. The preloaded kind, the kind that arrives too quickly and too cleanly, designed to pull focus toward her and away from whoever she was losing an argument with. It had worked on me for 34 years. I watched it with a kind of detached recognition, the way you watch a magic trick once you know the mechanism. Brett, 3 seats down, was staring at the restored photograph with an expression I'd never seen on him before. It might have been shame. I wasn't certain Brett had ever felt shame, so I couldn't say for sure. And then, from the far end of the table, quiet, deliberate, like a woman who has been waiting a very long time to speak, Aunt Deborah turned in her seat and looked at Cody. "While we're all here together," she said in the same tone she probably used when she caught students cheating, "I'd like to know where my mother's earrings are." The table cracked open the rest of the way. Cody's face did something complicated. He opened his mouth, he closed it. He looked at Gerald, who looked away. He looked at Brett, who suddenly found the tablecloth very interesting. Those were lost, Deb. I don't know what you're—" "They weren't lost," Deborah said. "They were taken. And we've been sitting around this table pretending otherwise for 3 years because nobody wants to have the conversation." She set her napkin down. "I'm having it now." Cody pushed back from the table slightly. His chair made a sound on the floor. "Where are they?" Deborah said again. She had the voice of someone who graded papers for 30 years. Patient, implacable, requiring an answer. I looked at Ruth. Ruth was watching Cody with the expression of someone who knew the answer and had known it for 3 years and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. I slid the photograph in front of her. Just her. I put my hand over the frame gently. "This was always for you," I said. She looked down at it. Her hand, small, spotted, with the slim fingers of someone who once played violin in Rochester, moved to the edge of the frame. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at me with eyes that were clouding at the edges but perfectly clear in the center. "Harold would have put you at the head of the table," she said. "Harold was my grandfather. He'd been gone for 11 years. He was the only man in this family who had ever asked me what I thought before announcing what he'd decided." I had to look away for a second. Then I stood up. I was very steady. Steadier heavier than I'd felt in months, which surprised me until it didn't, because the specific weight I'd been carrying since the night of the garage had just been set down, right here, in front of everyone who needed to see it. I moved to Ruth's side of the table and took the handles of her wheelchair. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," I said to her quietly. She reached up and patted my hand. "Take me somewhere with better lighting." We went to a diner 4 blocks away that had the kind of fluorescent lighting that is either terrible or perfect, depending on your age and your priorities. Ruth ordered a slice of coconut layer cake and a decaf coffee, and told me, for the first time in my life, the full story of how she and Harold had met at a skating rink in 1967, when he skated directly into a snowbank to avoid running her over. "He was a terrible skater," she said, "but he was the only man I ever met who would rather fall than hurt someone." I thought about that for a long time. We stayed for 2 hours. Ruth ate all of her cake. The folding chair stayed leaning against the wall at Callaway's. I didn't need it anymore, but I knew someone would have to look at it for the rest of that dinner. Through whatever uncomfortable, overdue conversation unfolded after I left, through Cody's reckoning and my father's red neck and my mother's preloaded tears, and I wanted them to. Not as cruelty, as documentation. In the weeks after Ruth's birthday dinner, a few things happened. Nolan Briggs, my attorney, sent a formal letter to my parents documenting the $11,400 in paid property taxes and requesting reimbursement. My father called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. On the third attempt, he left a message that said, "We'd like to find a way forward, as a family." I filed it, the way I file everything. My mother called once and said nothing. I heard her breathing for 11 seconds. Then she hung up. Brett texted me 3 days after the dinner. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." I read it and I believed it, and I did not respond, because sorry is a starting place, not a destination. And Brett and I were going to need a longer conversation than a text message when we got to it. Deborah called Cody's parents, her own brother and sister-in-law, and told them that Ruth's earrings needed to be returned or replaced within 30 days, or she would be filing a police report. I know this because Deborah told me herself in a phone call where she also said, "I should have said something years ago." I told her that the important thing was that she said it now. Ruth's earrings came back 3 weeks later. They arrived at Deborah's house in a padded envelope with no note. They were all there. Ruth held them in her palm and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "I always knew they'd come back. Things that matter usually do." I went back to see Dr. Marsh one more time, about 6 weeks after the dinner. She asked me how I felt. I thought about it seriously, the way she'd taught me to, not reaching for the easy answer, but sitting with the actual texture of the thing. "Lighter," I said, "and also a little sad." "What are you sad about?" "I don't think my father will ever understand what he did. Not really. He'll turn it into a story where he's the patriarch who got ambushed by an ungrateful daughter." I looked at my hands, and I think I spent a very long time hoping he'd surprise me. And now I've stopped hoping for the surprise, which is sad, but it's also clean. I paused. "Like a room after you've finally taken out the furniture that was never right for the space." Dr. Marsh nodded. "That sounds like clarity," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I think it is." 3 months later, on a Thursday in January, I drove up to the Catskills alone. The cabin was exactly as I'd remembered it, a low cedar structure at the edge of a frozen lake, with a porch that listed slightly left and a stone fireplace that my grandfather had built with his own hands in 1974. I had a key because I had always been the one who handled the paperwork and therefore the one who had always held the key. I built a fire. I sat in front of it with a cup of tea and a book I'd been meaning to read for a year, and I listened to the ice creak on the lake, and I didn't coordinate anything, and I didn't file anything, and I didn't manage anything. I just sat there. On the kitchen table, I left one thing before I drove home. A printed copy of the tax certificate, clear and clean, alongside a handwritten note. It said, "The cabin is yours. It always should have been. I hope you enjoy it." It wasn't signed. They would know. The last time I saw Ruth was in February. At a Sunday lunch Deborah organized at her house. Not a foster family event exactly, but something quieter. Ruth and Deborah and me and, at one point, Deborah's youngest daughter who was 12 and obsessed with horses. After lunch, while Deborah and her daughter were in the kitchen, Ruth reached into her cardigan pocket and held something out to me across the table. It was a pair of earrings, small, pearl and sapphire. Old. "These were my mother's," Ruth said, "before they were mine." I shook my head. "Ruth, I can't. They're not for sentiment," she said, which was a lie, but a kind one. "They're for keeping. Things that matter should go to people who know how to hold on to them." I looked at her face, at the eyes that were clouding at the margins but perfectly focused on mine. I took the earrings. I held on to them. My father has not apologized. I do not expect him to. Gerald Foster built a self-image over 70 years, and he is not in the business of renovation at this stage. I have made peace with that, not because he deserves my peace, but because I am done spending my resources maintaining hope in places that don't hold water. My mother has sent 2 cards, not letters, cards, the kind with pre-printed sentiments that require only a signature. I have kept them in the navy binder, not out of bitterness, but because documentation is a discipline I no longer abandon. Brett and I had dinner in March. It was uncomfortable, and then it was okay, and then it was something like a beginning. He picked up the check without being asked. It was a small thing. I noticed it. I think about what Ruth said sometimes. Harold would have put you at the head of the table. I've decided that what I'm building, going forward, is a table of my own. Small, sturdy, with seats for exactly the people who would notice in a quiet moment that you were missing. You don't need a long table. You need the right one.